big hello to everybody. Thanks for being here. Welcome to our panel. It's called Flood the Zone with Shit, which is a title which I enjoy a lot, even though it's a very nasty content, basically. Before I give you a lengthy introduction into what we're going to talk about, let me introduce the speakers so you know who you'll be listening to. On the screen behind me is Julia Angwin from New York City. She's an award-winning investigative journalist. She's the founder of two non-profit newsrooms, Proof News and The Markup, a best-selling author, a New York Times contributing opinion writer, and currently a Walter Shorenstein Media and Democracy Fellow at Harvard. Very bright. Also very bright, next to me in Hamburg is Barbara Junge, editor-in-chief of the year 2024, and at the Taz, which is the German daily, Die Tageszeitung. She has initiated, among other great things, a research hub on right-wing extremism. And before, Barbara Junge was correspondent for the Tagesspiegel in Washington, D.C. And finally, please welcome Justus von Daniels, editor-in-chief of Correctiv, I'm sure you all know, who was, with his team, named Journalist of the Year 2024, and with a background as an investigative reporter and a PhD in law. Justus has co-led the team that published the Geheimplan Recherche, the Geheimplan research last year. I'm sure you all know about that, and Julia does as well. I am Birte Meyer. I'm extraordinarily grateful that everybody came up here. We're going to have this discussion. I am Chief Investigative Reporter at RTL in Stern. Now, I am not sure if you've all read the big essay of Sulzberger, the New York Times publisher, which was published in the Washington Post, actually, in autumn 2024 on the playbook. And just to make sure you know what's in it, I give you a very, very, very brief introduction, if I may. So Sulzberger published an essay called How the Quiet War Against Press Freedom Could Come to America. And he analyzed, that was before the election of Trump, he analyzed the second election. He analyzed how authoritarian regimes in Hungary, Brazil, and India were attacking the free press, and he identified their strategy, which he called the playbook. And this is a very, very brief version of it. But basically, Sulzberger pointed out 5 tactics. One is sowing public distrust in independent journalism and normalizing harassment of journalists. Second, weaponizing the legal system to intimidate news organizations. Third, abusing tax laws, licensing laws, government contracts to punish critical outlets and reward loyal ones, outlets being media. 4, increasing the scale of attacks on journalists by attracting powerful supporters, basically making the problem bigger. And 5, encouraging wealthy supporters to gain control of independent media, but sort of first wreck the newspapers and then have them bought cheaply by friends. Not even a year later, now, summer 2025, we can see the playbook unfold in the US, and maybe even to a far lesser extent in Germany. The playbook strategy works gradually and often legally, making it harder to recognize and harder to resist. But its effect to silence dissent, to control the media narrative and erode democracy is quite powerful. So today, we'd like to discuss how we as journalists, not politics, not somebody else, just we as journalists, could tackle the challenges of authoritarian influence and populism and fake news, smear campaigns, the growing threat of cyberattacks, and everything else that's sort of coming towards us. And most importantly, how do we make journalism more robust under pressure? So that's what we're going to talk about. And I do hope that we're going to talk about solutions in the end. And if you have questions, I hope to have time left in the end. So please write them down, memorize them, be happy to share. So let's start. And I'd like to start with Julia because she's sort of farthest away. In the old times, journalists were the gatekeepers of news, and those were based on facts. Now fake news infiltrate the headlines. In Germany, for example, Alice Weidel famously claimed Adolf Hitler was a communist. Mark Zuckerberg said, fact-checkers destroy trust. It almost seems like anything goes. Truth at times seems to be optional. That's not a coincidence. It's a strategy, and it's a strategy of the new right. Steve Bannon, formerly advisor to President Trump, sort of famously said, flood the zone with shit. And I think that's what's happening. It's what's starting to happen in Germany, and it has been happening in the US for quite a while. So sort of you're ahead of us, Julia, in New York City. What is your experience? What implication does this strategy have for newsrooms?
I mean, it's great to see you all. I wish I was there in person, and I hope the audio sounds okay.
Perfect.
You know, it's an amazing time to be living through, and the Steve Bannon's flooding the zone with shit is the perfect description of what's happening, right? So every day there's multiple executive orders, there's multiple announcements of like policies. Some of them happen, some of them don't happen. But they're all outrageous, and so it's impossible to like put your hands around. And it's a really interesting evolution, I think, of authoritarianism, because in the old days, authoritarians would like basically, you know, put journalists in jail. It was a very much strict repression. But now they realize they can do this sort of, they can get the same result basically without having to buy the press or put them in jail. Now, and I'm not saying we're not all going to end up in jail one day. We probably will, but I think just to give it like a few years. But I just think like this is a new evolution where you realize you can get the same effect you want, which is to control the information environment without having to do the things that sort of the old school authoritarians did. And I think it's really hard for the press to accommodate. Like, honestly, we're all working from a 20th century playbook of, you know, that you do have to write about every executive order. But I don't know that we do, right? Like, do we really need to actually publish the lies? Like when you go to the White House for a comment and the comment is absolute bald-faced lies, like I think that we're at a moment where journalism needs to re-examine some of like our standards and practices and think about whether we need to can evolve them, because otherwise we're going to be crushed by this strategy. We are being crushed by this strategy.
Thank you, Julia. But how do you think about that, Barbara? How does the Taz deal with the strains on newsrooms and sort of flood the news with shit?
So Daniel and I were talking about our solutions we bring today. There are no solutions. There are no real solutions. We have like little solutions, part solutions. Since the AfD was in the Bundestag the first time, we decided there are no interviews with them. We quote them, sure, but no interviews. So reduce the shit. Perhaps that's the way to go. And then what we've done always, we still do. It's value-based journalism. Is journalism with an attitude, and I don't know what else we should do on the really journalistic level, because not repeating every shit. You can't always miss the things going on, even if they don't become law. And you have to, I think, journalism with an attitude and for democracy and for the rights of people of different origins and diverse backgrounds is important to hold the standards. Beside that, I think, and we talk about that later, I think there are a lot more, I would say, digital part solutions to counter all those narratives, perhaps. And then there's one more thing. We do that already. It's hard to say it here in the air and with you from ZDF, but formally, sorry, independency, because we have to make secure our paper, and that the way to go is independency. We are independent, but I think that becomes more and more and more important.
Thank you, Justus.
Yeah, I would like
journalism with an attitude. Could you pick that up, because I find that quite interesting.
Yeah, I would like to go a step back to what also like Julia said, because something at Correctiv we really try to understand. Still try to understand where we are as journalists, and it's an interesting and not so easy idea in the end to see that we are actually in a reactionary position, which is really not the position where we should be in. So flood the zone with shit. So all these news, all the spreading of fake news, which is actually just to destroy trust in journalism, brings us always in the situation of reacting to some situation that is directed against us. So I think it is very important for us, not only at Correctiv, but for journalism in general, that we are winning back the agency. So what you said, like we are there to curate information and to have a sort of, I always like the sentence of the wonderful journalist Jeff Jarvis from the United States, who said, journalism is conversation. So a newspaper is always a room where conversation takes part. And so we are actually the one who are responsible for this kind of conversation. So that's why I'm thinking, or we are thinking a lot, how to get back this agency. And maybe one example is we created this a team, I think now 8 years ago after the Brexit, for fact-checking. We did this in cooperation with Facebook. We did this along the line with the DPR. So we were two outlets doing fact-checking for some Facebook. And what we see there is the typical thing of fact-checking, you're always lagging behind. So it is for the people who are working in this field, it is really it's not a very nice job, because you're always reacting, you're always lagging behind. And after 8 years, we decided to stop doing this in the classical way, but going with this team into a different direction, saying we really have to go to the roots where the fake news are in, the classical investigative journalism, to really concentrate, to go and to look for the roots of these fake news, and not only debunking the fake news. So these are, first states where, like, winning back this agency is a very, very important thing for us.
I do agree. Thank you very much, both of you. I think before we go into the solution part, we need to... I love that you're jumping towards solutions, because we shouldn't be desperate, but be constructive about how we sort of continue doing our jobs properly. But maybe for somebody who hasn't dealt with the issue in the playbook, we should explain a little bit more what's going on before going to the solutions. And I do remember, and put it down, basically you're saying we need to be the agenda setters. We need to be back sort of in the movement ahead of things rather than reacting, which I think is a very good point. And I don't remember, I will not forget. The playbook says that sort of sowing distrust goes further than sowing fake news. It includes harassment of journalists to create a hostile climate, and I think we should be aware what is going on. In Germany, there was the case of Nicholas Potter, who's a Berlin-based journalist working for the Taz. Could you tell to those who are not aware of him what happened and how challenging that was for the Taz, how to react to that?
So Nick was the case when digital harassment became real life harassment. He's a reporter at the Taz, and was in Israel with a fellowship. He's involved in topics around Israel anyways. But when he did a research about, it's hard, because we have lawsuits about that, about a Russia-connected website that is dealing with a lot of shit in a militantly and very biased Gaza view, so opposite to what is Nick doing. I hope that's been okay how I described it. Okay, but he did a research on it and found someone who's behind the websites and went to the roots, and then started a campaign about him, first online or on X, basically, but other channels as well. And then in in April, yeah, March or April, posters were found, or the first was one. We don't know if there are more of them with his face, his name, and the red triangle, and like a wanted poster, and really calling for beating him up or threatening his life. That was really real. And we, in the first place, when the harassment was still digital only, we tried to calm it down a little bit. We didn't want to talk about it a lot. We didn't do it in the first place. We only did it when other media were writing about it. But it's not because we forgot, oh, there's a problem, but we tried to calm it. Because it's easy to focus on one person and then 100 people and hundreds of people focus on this one person. So, but when it became that obvious and that threatening, we went forward. Here, Anja is here from Reporter ohne Grenzen, and who else? I don't remember. The journalistic groups. This DJV, it was, went out with their own statements, just about what is happening, and also calling for solidarity, or we were calling for solidarity, and it really came. Hard critics of Niklas came forward with solidarity. That was a good sign. It didn't help a lot because some weeks later the second poster went up. So, but still, it was a really important feeling for him to be not alone. But still, he's anxious, sure. He wasn't at our house for a while, and we have additional security levels in our house. We had for a while security in our house, and we're talking about tats. So it's and we had a lot of conversations with the police about that. He still doesn't feel really safe because it's still going on. I think that's a special situation because it's about the war on and in Gaza, but still it's an example how that happens.
It's also, I find that very interesting in sort of how security slowly creeps into our lives. Mm-hmm. There's more and more research and more colleagues who you hear, should we have security or heightened security, more locks, less open doors within the newsrooms. And you just hear those stories, and it's not like somebody decided that we all need security. It just slowly creeps in, and it does change, of course, the way you go to the office and the way you go to the workplace. And I think he was very lucky that he was actually with Taz, and you made a really big move forward, and then you got the solidarity. But you could also imagine being a sort of small freelancer, not being supported on a large scale, and therefore suffering a lot more. So I think we've got strategy number one of the playbook, which is sort of sowing distrust and normalizing harassment. Strategy number two is weaponizing the legal system through basically useless lawsuits sometimes to intimidate and financially burden news organizations. And before I come to Julia, who's patiently waiting, I'd like to talk to Justus on the Geheimplan research, because you did have lawsuits. In the beginning, I'm sure you all know, so I cut it very briefly, but in the beginning it was a huge success. 100,000 people went to the streets and demonstrated, and it was deemed a research with a very high impact. And then slowly something changed, and I think the lawsuits might have had something to do with it. Can you explain what had happened sort of within that year, basically?
Yeah, it was a kind of unexpected and expected at the same time. So it was clear that that some of these people wanted to take us to the court, and for the first weeks they didn't. So that was the unexpected part. So that was interesting. So something must have been right with this investigation, with this text. But only 5 weeks later, we got two lawsuits. And the interesting thing is what followed in the aftermath is they didn't really want to win these cases. It was, you know, for some reason, it didn't matter for them. It just mattered that they had the news out that they go to court.
And maybe quickly interrupt. Who was suing?
One of the persons who was part of these of this meeting in Potsdam, and he filed like, I don't know, 1 or 2 lawsuits against us. And what he did, he complained a lot of sentences, and he kind of knew that he wouldn't win it, but he won a little bit. Like a small fraction of a sentence. So this puts a lot of pressure to the press officer in the court. How do you announce this in the court, as the court ruling? You know, the corrective lost a part of a case. So that was the headline. It was really a fraction of a sentence, which didn't mean anything. But this headline was then picked up by other media and was said, okay, corrective lost. Corrective had to take away, or everything is wrong. So it really went down the whole line. In the right-wing media, that wasn't really a surprise. But what was surprising to us then, that some media you would say you would trust, you know, like in the normal space. Sometimes there are people who are a little bit lazy and maybe who are also a little bit jealous at the same time. So what they did, actually, they reported on it and they said, yeah, there were various cases against corrective. Nobody really knows what really had happened. You know, it would have been easy to look that nothing really happened, but they also set a narrative. So what happened is there was a narrative out there casting doubts about this kind of journalism. And this narrative sticks to the heads of people, of course. And people who don't like us or who don't like, I don't know, people who write about right-wing extremists, they like to see these headlines. So they see these headlines and then they kind of talk about it. And it's really, really it's really hard to get into their heads again. So that's a strategy. And that's not only in this case, but we saw other cases last year. I mean, some of you might remember the Rammstein cases, which were also like disputed in court. And the NDR, for example, in the Süddeutsche Zeitung were quite successful, but still, you know, many people think everything was wrong. And that's something we see which is coming. And so we as journalists can't do much about it. We just try to be strong and correct. But we also have to tell this to the people who work in the legal sphere, that they know how to deal with these cases before court, you know, and also with the spokespersons of these people, how to handle this. So otherwise they are used as a tool for creating these counter-narrative.
So I'd put down, we are not the gatekeepers of news anymore. We're certainly not the gatekeepers of narratives, but we're also fighting back against narratives which are being set. And a constructive Vorschlag could be to talk to actually the press people of courtrooms. I'm not exactly sure how far that would get us. Nevertheless, I think we have understood sort of the danger of legal battles, and we've talked about slap suits, who I'm sure you're all aware of, for quite some while. So I would, for us in order to come to the solution part rather quick, come to Julia in strategy number, sorry, I'm looking for my piece, the Geheimplan I have, strategy number 4, we had number 3, increase the scale of attacks and encourage political allies to gain control of independent media. So what role, and I think that is quite striking, or might turn out quite striking in the US, how vulnerable are owners of media companies, such as Jeff Bezos of the Washington Post, because their companies also rely on government contracts? How optimistic are you that's going to work out fine, or how vulnerable is the US media system because broadcasting and quite a few media outlets are owned by big corporations?
I mean, I think that question has sort of been asked and answered. What we have seen since the election is that, the president has made it clear that he wants loyalty over anything else, and that he will punish his political enemies. And a lot of media is owned by like big corporations that have multiple interests, that they are in front of the government. And we've basically seen that all of those companies in some way or another have made some accommodations, right? Jeff Bezos sort of fired his editorial page people who were being too aggressive, and said that they were just going to focus on free markets, whatever that means. But it was clearly a sign that they were going to pull back on criticism of the administration. And then, of course, you've seen the defamation lawsuit payments by major broadcasters. And so we are in a situation where corporate media has revealed itself, honestly. Like, we have now seen that they are not able to stand up to the government. And that means that, like, we're left with places like the New York Times, which doesn't really have another business other than the Times. So it seems like they're our last kind of big independent media. We still have great journalists doing great work at all of these places, but they're under threat, right? And so it's a very terrible situation because, you know, I have been spending the past 6 months interviewing dissidents from around the world to try to understand what we in the U.S. need to know about rising authoritarianism, because, you know, we're just not that good at like this stuff. We're a new country. We're still figuring stuff out. And all of them said to me that independent media is the most key thing for combating authoritarianism. You need to have something other than basically whatever your nation's Pravda is, right? Like, you need something other than the state lies for people to understand what's really going on. And we're, of course, nowhere near, right, a situation where right now where the state controls all the media, but we are in, when you add this flood the zone with shit thing to the corporate compliance, it's not a great situation. And what I worry about a lot is that a lot of the quote independent media that is like, that really is the most adversarial to the government and is willing to take the most risks is also, other than the New York Times, is mostly like a lot of substackers and, you know, people who don't have institutional resources, legal resources, security resources. These are financially precarious. And so this is what our independent media is looking like, and it feels very shaky. Wait, did you say you wanted solutions? Sorry, I think
my idea was that at 2:30, which is exactly 2:30 Hamburg time, which is exactly now, we're going to move to the solutions, because I think solutions are really, really sort of important, obviously, in this part. So yeah, if you have a solution on top, I was just going to start with a round of advice and solutions and tips. How are we going to survive?
I'll give you one. Yeah,
please.
I'll give you. So essentially, the thing that I learned also talking to dissidents around the world is that the only solution ever in all situations is solidarity. It's always solidarity. And so, for instance, I wish that the U.S. press had all walked out when the White House kicked the AP out of the White House press room. I think that showing solidarity together and saying, no, you know what, we're not going to sit here and listen to what is essentially just a stream of lies anyways, we're going to defend our colleagues. And so we haven't seen that amount of solidarity. It's actually really hard. The press loves to compete with each other. We're not great at solidarity. It's not really our skill set, but it is something that we need to do. For instance, like, I'm worried about when the inevitable lawsuit or harassment starts to happen to the journalists who are currently the most adversarial, which maybe is like the Wired journalists, or there's some Substackers like Marissa at the Handbasket that are doing really like leading work, revealing what's going on in the administration. And I want everyone to stand with them when that happens. And, you know, a lot of the universities have developed these things. So the universities have this thing they've developed called the Mutual Aid Compact, where they will agree to help each other when they are inevitably attacked by the administration. This is the Big Ten. They did this after the Ivy Leagues were attacked. And I think journalists could do something like that. And I would love to see something like that emerge. So that's a possible solution.
Thank you. You've mentioned solidarity when dealing with the attacks on Nicholas Potter before. I think we all agree solidarity is always a great thing if you're up against somebody big. The question, I think, the most interesting regarding solidarity is who's going to be who's included in the solidarity panel. So let's say we would fear, hypothetically, that we'll have an infringement of press rights. We'll have expensive lawsuits coming down on smaller media outlets. Should we? And I talked to a lot of people in Perugia on the same question, and they said it's especially from the US. It's very important to have that part of the media on your side, which your adversary thinks is their friend, which is the conservative panel. It would be probably Fox News in the US, and it would probably be Springer in Germany. Because it does make sort of the media a lot stronger because you have basically more impact. What do you think about that? Open question.
I would think that's not realistic in the sense of we are partnering and then everything is fine. I think we need organizations that bind us together. I don't know, and more of that. And perhaps we have to invest in those organizations. But I think the just coming together and then forgetting someone, oh, sorry, I thought whatsoever. Yeah. So we need organizations that are there for solidarity, for against lawsuits, against harassment. There are organizations out there already, but perhaps we should take one step up. I don't know. That seems to me realistic.
May I add up? If you're talking about organizations, you're talking NGOs like Reporter ohne Grenzen, Deutsche Journalisten, Freiheitsorganisation, etc. Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Or perhaps it's those together in a special solidarity fund or whatsoever, but I think we need this level.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, for the solidarity fund, I recently had an interesting discussion with a lawyer who was working for a big law firm, and he said, why shouldn't we actually do this? Why shouldn't we, as law firms, big law firms, found a kind of solidarity fund for pro bono help for journalism in general, and then whoever needs help can get it, and so other publishers don't have to jump in. Why should Springer pay for Taz or for Korrektiv, and vice versa?
Because they might benefit. No, seriously, that's the idea of solidarity.
So we have to assess the realism in this solidarity, because I also think it is one of the key things, and you both mentioned it. I also would to stress it, and I would also like add another layer of solidarity, meaning the solidarity of our future, the solidarity of the new platforms. So, if we as journalists and if we as publishers don't get a common idea about who are the gatekeepers and what can we do it to promote or to help founding the gatekeeper which is actually benefiting information and the access to information and not sucking up all information.
Maybe I quickly interrupt, because I think the most interesting question in what you said is who's we? Is we the journalists who are not on the platform? Is the platform, are we talking social media? I mean, basically, you're talking about a redefinition of what is journalism, or
not at all. I mean, we for example, at Korrektiv, we talk about social networks and we talk about media, and this is still a distinction we make until social networks are media. Then we can go to a different debate, but this is something maybe Markus can also talk about from Markus Beckedahl. But this is, I just wanted to make this general point of solidarity, that we think ahead together. That also means thinking ahead together new models of new company models. For example, you have the usual market, but you also have the non-profit, you have the Taz way of doing this. So how to develop, for example, a non-profit model for other media that works, not only for ProPublica in the United States, not only for us and for some smaller outlets, but which could be a way for local media. But this can also only grow if large other publishers also think with us together. I think so. This is also a form of solidarity.
And we're talking a lot about solidarity, and that's really, 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 really important. But that's still a reaction. It's still defending us. That can't be the solution, because it's like I hope it doesn't get too bad. But countering, at least controlling, I don't know, countering those narratives is. I think even more important, because that's where it comes from. So the narrative is against us. So we have to counter the narrative, and not only the narrative about journalism, but all what is going on there. That's why I said to him, Markus Begedal, who just founded together with Compact, a platform, on our panel, kind of, because I think that's really important what you're doing, to say, okay, how can we, I don't know if you already have the solution, but how can we not only develop our own narratives, but make them really grow, so that they become kind of a force, at least. Flourish, and that's it has to be on platforms. It doesn't work the other way. It doesn't work the conventional way of journalism. So there's this distinction. We should just get rid of it, because journalism has a lot of ways, but now we have to get some, I would say, digital sovereignty. Because we don't have that. Yeah,
I think we've lost the game, basically, or media companies have lost the game to social media platforms, quite obviously and quite sadly. If I understood you correctly, and we'll come to Markus and your questions in 5 minutes, I promise. If I understood you correctly, you're basically still making a distinction between journalists operating on more or less traditional media companies and platforms, or not. Just roughly speaking, I'd like to hear Julia's opinion on that. If basically, it doesn't make any sense anymore to make a difference between journalists working for media companies, more traditional, or working for platform news influencers, so-called. Nasty word.
Sorry. The audio is getting like a little muddled, so I'm not entirely sure what you asked me. So I'm just going to talk about what I feel like talking about.
Sure, I cut you short if the audience didn't work.
So I was thinking about what you just said about like how we have to flip the narrative, and I think that's really true, right? Like if you think about what's happening in a larger context, we're in basically an information war. And there's one side that is attacking us and saying we're terrible and that they have the right narrative. I mean, this may or may not be as true in Germany. It's certainly the case here in the US. And so when I think about this information war, I think one of the real problems is that we don't have the public on our side. They are not, I mean, I'm sure you've seen the numbers, right? Like in the US, I think it's like 20% of Americans think the press is trustworthy. And it's, and so I think actually one of these things is about reframing our relationship with the audience. So I'm going a little bit Gandhi here, which is like, you know, when you fight the British, first you have to make your own clothes. I think this is similar. Like, I think we have to think about our own role and what we do. Because one thing that I've noticed, and I've been working on and researching in Harvard at where I'm doing this fellowship, is that the independent media, the creators on YouTube and TikTok and Substack, they have a very different relationship with their audience. The audience actually suggests stories to them. They respond to the comments in a way that like is not common among a lot of the legacy media press. And the audience feels like the journalist is on their side. And I think if we want to win this information war, we have to have that position. And so I guess I would argue that like one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot recently is I'm an investigative journalist. Like that's what I spent my career in. It's very high status and it's cool stuff. But like I'm actually been thinking a lot about like, do you really need to investigate people whose corruption is out in the open? Like, this is an administration that is like, they're not hiding it, right? The corruption is just right there. And so maybe explanatory work is more important and also serves the audience more and is something you can have a conversation with the audience about it, which is like, how can I help you understand the crypto dinner where, you know, President Trump made $150 million selling seats to a dinner at the White House for his own personal benefit. So I feel like that is the kind of work that we need to do to win the information war. And I mean, it speaks to what you were saying about the journalism as a conversation.
Cool. That was 2 minutes more. Do you want to reply to that? I saw Justus moving.
I would just add one, because it was so wonderful what you were just saying, Julia. And I would phrase like it that we really have to develop a radical interest in the user and in the people. So I mean real radical. So ask them, engage them, challenge them, give them something. So journalism is about, so what you described, what the YouTuber who's really, you know, trying, getting the hearts of the reader because because they think, he or she understands me. We have technologies, we have tools that we as, you know, journalists, as media, can actually get near to them. We can go local, so we can actually open, so what we just do, we open a cafe in a small city and say we are there doing journalism in this cafe and you can come to us. So I think like small media, local media, but also national media have to really rethink this radical interest, because I also think very much that this is a good solution. Yeah.
Agree?
I wouldn't go local, but I would go social, I would say, and building communities. I have to admit, even in our organization, we're not focusing enough on that. I have a colleague sitting here. It's still kind of at the side. We're trying to put more emphasis in this part, but community building means getting to know what people want, what they think. It means solidarity as well, because when we talk about independence, we have to have other sources of finance, and so we need those communities who fund. So it's easy for us because we have that, but we need more of that, I think. And to have that, you have to be in constant contact, what we are, which we are, and we've done that for as long as we exist, kind of, or as long as we have our Genossenschaft association, then we have to communicate really radically with them, and I think community building on that level as well is extremely important.
Thank you very much. So I agree on something, and while I try to sum up what's been said in the last 45 minutes, do you have any questions? And if so, who would you direct that question to?
But I'm not, sorry,
Yes,
just I think there's one thing we didn't emphasize enough. It's really security, and not only concerning law, but digital security, because we're so vulnerable. And I think that's also a part we have to get better, because what we've seen with our colleague, that's just like this little, and there's more to come, I think. So digital security should be strengthened a lot more.
Yeah, and if no, absolutely, and if I may add, just the way it might make sense to have a sort of legal trust fund or have proper lawyers giving their time pro bono. To support smaller outlets and freelancers, it probably would be a very good idea to put up an IT support system for smaller players in the market as well, because it gets very hard to get very expensive to buy the sort of intelligence you need by now to be on the safe side. Completely agree. Nevertheless, any questions? Shall I pass on the micro? Does that work?
Thank you. Julia, I really thought it was so interesting, your point of making the audience feel like we're on their side. But how would you do that if the audience, or if many people at least, say things that you totally can't agree with, like migration is the mother of all problems in Germany?
Do you want to answer that?
That's such a good question. You know, it's interesting. I've been spending a lot of time with like YouTube and TikTok news creators, and what I find really interesting about them is they have no problem just literally blocking users. Like if somebody in their audience is saying something they don't agree with, they just say block, delete, and they actually curate their audience in a way that I think we are not used to in this legacy media, where it's like we're just trying to be the platform for everyone. They're like, no, this is a community. It needs to be a safe space, and I'm getting those people out of there. And that makes me uncomfortable with my training and like what I've grown up with. But I think it's something we have to start thinking about.
Does it answer the question?
We do that.
Yeah,
I think it's the right way.
Yeah. Anybody else? Könntest du das Mikro da einmal nach... danke.
I have a question for the whole panel, so whoever feels like answering. So with everything going on, what's something that you would wish for from the journalists coming in? Because I know that a focus of this conference is also getting a lot of younger people to go into the job. So what's something that you think our job would be coming in?
Okay, we start with Justus.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is really go out and try to meet these people who are your reader or your user, and try to get into conversation. And this is, I mean, we are really experimenting at the moment. For example, with this coffee thing. So we really setting up a coffee in a small town and saying, you know, this is also like a newsroom, and we want to get into a debate. And what I see with colleagues, when we do these things, that some colleagues really have a hard time to talk to people, and because they used to sit, you know, behind the desk, and for decades this was also like a picture of how you envision a journalist, you know, these old men sitting in a desk behind a stack of paper and writing super clever stuff. But and then he goes home and he doesn't care. And I think now caring for the people you're producing for is a key element, and it can be a huge thing that maybe we have tools in the near future which make it much easier not to only have a conversation with one, or maybe a Zoom meeting with 200, but also a conversation with a whole community in a way that you can actually structure their information and work with that. And also, like what we also have as an experience in meeting these people or opening these meeting places, that people are coming with their not only with their story, but also with interesting hints, talking about investigative journalism. So sometimes they come and they tell you a story which might lead you to investigate that. And yeah, if I would give one of these advices, to say, yeah, go out.
If there are more questions out, we have 9 minutes left.
Okay, just I try to be short. What I really need is enthusiastic journalists. So people, because we need resilience. The times will get harder, I think. So you really have to be enthusiastic about the job, and I would say bring an attitude, but be open enough to see more perspectives, to understand that right-wing is not right-wing extremism, for example, but still with your own attitudes and your own values, but to be resilient, to have this core interest and enthusiasm.
Julia, anything else but enthusiasm? Can you hear us?
Oh, sorry. Are you asking me about?
Yeah, the question was to the panel, and
for the young people. Sorry, I feel like I endorse what you guys are saying, and I would say that the thing that is really challenging that's happening here in the U.S., and I don't know how much is there, is that young people are growing up a little bit more with this creator model of news. So they come into the newsroom with into a traditional newsroom, but they have some expectations around interacting with the audience, being responsive, and most importantly, which we haven't talked about, they do not believe in objectivity, which is a myth that my generation grew up with. And it's, we haven't discussed it, but I do think that's one of the things that we have to also get rid of as part of our new Gandhi strategy of reinventing media.
Okay, I would have a question regarding objectivity and activism, but are there any more questions in the room? Okay, could we get the micro to the last row, white T-shirt, please?
Thanks, Jen. First of all, thank you a lot. I would have a question for you, Julia, because you also, if I understood it right, you also talked about that you were talking also with exiled journalists, hearing their experience. And I would ask you if you have the feeling if this is a path to a solution to also raise the voices of exiled journalists that are, for example, also already in Germany, to listen to their stories and make their voice louder in the media we're having in the society.
Can you, Bartosz, summarize that for me? I'm getting, the audio is a little distorted. So.
No, I'm sorry. Can you hear me better on this microphone?
Yes, a little bit.
I can also just sort of try to text it to you. It's basically you did talk a lot to journalists in exile, and is raising those voices a solution as well? Is that a brief version of your question? Yes. Shall we repeat?
I'm so
basically,
sorry.
it's no problem. If it's the audience, basically is empowering journalists in exile and raising their voices and talking to them and amplifying their voices. Is there going to be a solution?
Is there a solution for journalists if they're raising their voices?
Nope. Raising their voices as as journalists in the US, raising journalists' voices in the exile, journalists outside the US. Would there be a solution? I think was the question.
No, the question was more like if we can find a solution in the way that, for example, here in Germany, we are starting to raise the voice of exiled journalists with their stories, their experiences, and to see, because they experienced many times the way we, or the path we are going slowly. And if you think it is a solution to also put these voices more in the center of our media conversation.
Got it. I think I don't know exactly what this ex-journalist you're talking about.
Exile journalist.
Yeah, what's an
exile
journalist?
A journalist in exile, not at home.
Thank you, exiled. Okay,
Sorry.
now I understand what's going on. I do think that, I don't know exactly about the specificity of the exiled journalist, but I would say that, putting at the center a more diverse set of voices is something that I think is going to help win the information war, which is really what I think is the best way to frame this. One of the things that I think is really important is that in what I'm noticing here, particularly in the sort of challenge to the authoritarian instincts of our president, is that actually there's a lot of people who are not self-identified as journalists, but who bring the sharpest critiques because they are experts in their field, right? So a legal expert can say why the attack on law firms is better. And in the old days, we would just quote them in a story, but now those people are basically writing their own blog posts, have their own channel. And so one thing I think that traditional legacy journalists could do is center voices with expertise, whether it's an exiled journalist who can talk about their country or an expert in the field, and not necessarily treat it just like an interview, right? That there's more about centering these voices in a way that brings the audience into the conversation. I am not sure I'm fully answering the question, but I hope that it gets somewhere near it.
I think you did. I hope. Okay, 4 more minutes, 1 more question, and then a round of very quick last words, I think.
If there are no questions, I could try to still answer your question, because I think that's part of solidarity. But what is happening and has happened in authoritarian regimes is, I think, rather it's understood already. There were so many voices, and there are so many studies about it. So that I would say it's part of solidarity and international solidarity, but it's not really a solution, because understanding is not our problem, I think.
Yeah, successful fighting is what is needed now, I think. Okay. So no more questions. I spare my question, if Lena allows, on advocacy and journalism for the next round, next panel. Any last words you would like to have?
I'm just surprised we have at least some solutions together.
So being optimistic at these times is not easy, and it's also interesting to see that journalists try to be optimistic since. So we try to have like good news and try to talk about solution-based journalism, and I think this is also like a very interesting debate, taking this very seriously. That journalism is not only, or the journalist is not only the person who is being the critical person with bad mood. So I think if we deliver this today, then we got something.
Do you want to add on to that, Julia? Did you hear it at least?
I would just build off of that great point, which is like that's why I think we have to reconceive our role in this world right now, because really our job is to challenge power and hold power to account fundamentally. And at this moment, actually building hope and solidarity is holding power to account. And so as much as we love, and I love writing bad news and like I'm really good at it, we do have to get to a place where we can help the audience see a different future. And that leads to my point, which is objectivity doesn't really work in that model. I think fairness is a better model. And so I'll leave you with kill objectivity, let's all be Gandhi.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to charge a great Churchill quote with you, which is, of course, what counts is hold the line. Every centimeter counts. It's going to be so much harder to fight back. So, as Churchill put it, an appeaser is one who feeds a crocodile hoping it will eat him last. So if you're sometimes in a bad mood, I try to quote Churchill because it really helps. Thank you all for having a great debate, for coming here, being a very attentive audience, and thanks for all the wonderful speakers. And I think there was a very interesting panel, and to people from the technic board that we actually got Julia on board finally. Thank you.